was the US President speaking earlier this evening, American time. Well, for more on this, we're joined by Edward Blakely from the US Study Centre here at the University of Sydney. Professor Blakely, thanks so much for coming on in. What was your reaction when you heard the outcome to this case?
Well, of course, it was unbelievable, given the scale of this incident. Maybe one shot, maybe some slight harm, but shooting the man that many times, it looks like murder to almost anyone. So has justice been done? And the issue here is that police have a wide latitude when they think there's danger or suspect danger. So the grand jury had to climb a very high wall saying this was an intentional act. But this doesn't mean this is over. There are two things that are going to happen. This is a tipping point. Remember Rodney King, the Watts riots. There's injustice in small towns, big cities around America, and we have to watch for that. The second issue here is, what does the federal government do? Because the federal government can prosecute for violations of civil rights. So if the federal government doesn't move fast, the first thing is almost certain.
So when the community says the system has let them down yet again, are these the systems that you're pointing to that can make a difference?
Yes. The justice system is supposed to bring justice. But when it comes down to it, the justice system has to weigh up what the legal rules and regulations are. We've seen plenty of that here. So when these things are weighed up, the person says, I know what justice is. Justice is, if you've taken somebody's life, you need to pay for it in some way. For the black American, this is particularly trying because no one's trying harder to be a good citizen than many black Americans. And when incidents like this come about, it is really troubling for the entire community.
Professor Blakely, what is it about this case? Why has this case in particular sparked such a reaction, become such a focal point, such a crucible in looking at race relations in the US?
Well, it's really not this case. Remember the Zimmerman case, okay? So there was a build-up to this case. There's other small incidents that occurred around the United States. So this case really pushed it over the edge. Furthermore, it's in a metropolitan area where there have been difficulties in the past. So it was a confluence of circumstances, and it's gone on for far too long. I think that's, usually these things are hosed down pretty quickly. Then you get another spike when the jury reaches their verdict. This has been continuous and keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And you hear people from towns all around the United States saying they want to join. It's tough.
Now, speaking of the jury, was it a problem that of the 12 members, 9 of them were white and 3 were black? Is that an issue?
Well, probably not, in the sense that that might be the composition of the community. But it's an issue when you have to go beyond what is the written record, what is, justice is supposed to be blind. It's supposed to really understand the totality of the circumstances. I want justice for the police officer who acted inappropriately, but also justice for Mr. Brown. And both have to be weighed. And that seems to, in the United States, it goes wrong in one direction or the other. So it's now, unfortunately, left to the President of the United States to take action that will bring this down.
The President, as we heard, called for calm, called for those who did want to protest to do so peacefully. The family of Mr. Brown also asked for calm. Yet in the face of that, the Missouri governor called a state of emergency. We saw police in riot gear on the streets very quickly in anticipation of trouble. What do you think the effect was of that calling of the state of emergency and the visual presence of so many riot police there on the streets of Ferguson?
That's just throwing gasoline on the fire. And that's going to become a bigger and bigger fire. People go to those places where they see the riot gear. They want to be part of that action. So that's going to cause the same kind of thing happening in other cities. We've already heard protests beginning in New York City and Brooklyn and other places. Protests will be in Los Angeles, San Francisco. Everyone's going to want to be in this. And the smart ones will send out peace officers, not people in riot gear.
Now, you were actually called into New Orleans in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, and amongst your efforts to rebuild, there was, of course, the racial tension, the racial divide. What worked in your efforts to bridge that divide, and what could also be applied in this case, which is rather different, but then I guess there are some that could ring true here?
There are things that are very similar in that when the African American community feels it's being deprived of its liberties, and in the case of Katrina, its property, it reacts, and it reacts sometimes violently. The only way to quell that is to do things that people see. One of the things that one of the people told me when I went in, justice must be seen to be done, Dr. Blakely. So make sure if you do something, it is very visible. And in this case, I think the local police department and the governor have to be seen to be doing justice. There are probably other statutes that could be brought in this case. That was the governor's first wrong move. Don't bring in the police. Say what I'm going to do visibly to make a difference in your community. So that's what I had to do. And in some cases it meant, opening a school that was only partially available to show the community that justice is going to be done.
Professor Blakely, finally and briefly, going back to that scenario, or those two scenarios you outlined right at the start when we started talking, do you think a solution will be found and quickly, or do you think it will be that scenario one, that this will continue to flare up and spread?
I think the president is in an unusual position because of his color, his stature, and his notion of community. So he will be calling in some favors from governors, from people he knows, to bring the peace into the community. And he'll take the visible step of asking the Justice Department to move into Ferguson and see that justice is done in this case. So I think we happen to have the right person in the right job at the right time.
Edward Blakely from the US Studies Centre, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.